Hi guys, welcome back to Offgrid and Connected. It has been a while. I've been working on other jobs and have not had the time to edit this great interview with Guy, who talks about his experience in Botswana, his role as a lead natural builder, project development work, initiatives down in Cape Town, a whole bunch of stuff. And he has a really different angle than most people, just due to his locations and his experience. He's collaborated with a bunch of other organizations, including Long Way Home. I will be having an interview, or posting rather, an interview with Matt soon as well. So look out for that. As always, you can buy t-shirts online just follow the shop link on the offgrid.vision website. Enjoy this conversation and see you soon. So, two projects you're working on then. You're working on this one down in South Africa, and then you said come back up to your project.
Yeah, so up here in Botswana, we are currently finishing off a little cafe space, an outdoor cafe space, for a technical vocational training college that's starting up in Gaborone called Young Africa. The bottom section is earthram tires, and then the top section is what we call a bubble wall. I've never really seen it done anywhere else.
Is this what I've seen on your pages, where you've got the tires?
The tires stand vertically. Yeah. It's not that anybody. I'm sure someone has done it. I'm sure it's been done many times. I've just never seen it anywhere else. It's something we stumbled across at the Delft Early Childhood Development Center in Cape Town a couple of years ago, where the architect was looking for a way to create a screen wall to divide two spaces, essentially containing these little kids safely on one side of this wall, but he wanted them to be able to see their parents on the other side if they came to pick them up in the car park. So he wanted this security screen so that, people couldn't just wander into the school unannounced or unvetted, and that the kids couldn't kind of get out, but that they could see through. And we had loads of tires on site, and I'd been clambering around in the rafters doing divider walls inside the buildings. And we had stored a whole bunch of bottle bricks in tires in different colors and sizes and things. So the tires were sitting flat on the ground with bottles stacked inside them to stop them from being damaged. And I was looking down on them and actually taking photographs of something else. And later on, I was looking at these pictures and saw this pattern that was being created with tires and bottles. And when the architect was kind of challenging us as to what to do, this vision popped into my head of, well, take what was lying down flat and put it vertical. And we got what we call a bubble wall because it looks like bubbles from far away. And you essentially bolt or screw the tires together to create this,
the mesh.
Pretty robust. Yeah, they create this mesh, and they're pretty robust because they've got all that steel in them and they've got all that rubber. And especially if you build it within a frame and then you bolt it and secure it to the frame on the outsides, it's like bomber. I mean, I climb up and down them when I'm building them. So, and then we've gone crazy and filled in the gaps selectively in between them. We've filled the tires themselves in some cases. What I'm particularly drawn to is leaving certain tires open and then using them as planters. So we drill holes into the sidewall towards the bottom so they can drain. And then you get these beautiful, different shapes and different size tires with different side walls, give you different effects. You get these interesting triangle shapes in between them. They tessellate really beautifully. And then you can get this wonderful permeable, light comes through, air comes through. You can plant, creepers and hen and chickens, cascading plants and succulents and really beautiful plants in there. And yeah, it just creates this very interesting textured wall that can either be a full wall or a very open, breathable, light emitting, transmitting thing. It's fun.
Oh no, I saw it the other day on the photo and just thought, wow, yeah, it's so obvious but not obvious at the same time.
Yeah, as I say, I'm sure someone's done it before.
Yeah.
But I haven't seen it done.
Let's go back a bit. So you left Malawi, and it just seemed like from afar. I mean, it seemed like you just had that, were inspired by Mike Reynolds' ideas and stuff, and then just ran with it and created. I seem to remember like a metal frame in an initial thing you were doing, a big sort of building with a steel frame, maybe.
Yeah. So look, what the journey, as I recall it in a nutshell. I mean, I kicked off. I first heard of tire building and this kind of stuff. I think in 2009, I think was when I first looked into it. I had decided to come back to Gaborone, Botswana, and start trying to push something practical and that started from people outward rather than from game reserves. In terms of conservation and land care and earth care, and I stumbled across the stuff. So it was about 2009. Then I found the Earthship stuff, and I applied to do something in Swaziland. They were going to do a build there. The idea was much the same as the way the build came about in Malawi, except I think it was a private house. That never happened. They never got back to me. And in fact, I learned later the build never actually took place. But I felt at the time that they had looked at I took it very personally, like, oh, they saw.
It's so funny how we do that at times, isn't it?
Yeah, and we don't realize that like 30 million people probably applied for it. Anyway, long story short, like 3 or 4 years later, no, 2 years later, out of the blue, I got this email from someone at Earthship saying, hey, I've just taken over the volunteer program, and I'm sifting through old emails, and I've just found yours. Do you ever want, that build never happened. Do you want to come to the States? So I went to the States in 2012 for an internship.
Oh, right. I didn't realize you'd done that. Okay, cool.
Yeah, so I'd done that in 2012, and that was amazing. That was in New Mexico. Stayed at the Hive in the Greater World Community, did that, built on a project in Pataka, which is, I don't know how many miles. It felt like about 60 kilometers away from Taos itself. And then Malawi was 2014. And that I was just really excited. I'd seen how they build in the States with, right in their own backyard where they created the whole concept. And I was just intrigued to see it was an opportunity that was too good to miss, to see what they did in Africa, so much closer to me. Much more in my kind of environment, my kind of physical environment, but also the social environment and all of that. So,
yeah, it was fascinating to see you there as an African, being at home, and just
yes.
it gave certainly for myself, it was just an extra point of interest. I remember talking about a lot of colonies of ants and what they were up to and all sorts of interesting stuff. And there was also Paul there as well, who's obviously, sort of Africa-based very much. So.
Yes, yeah. So that was a fascinating experience to see the guys who had been doing this for decades also kind of thrown out of their depth, and just having to make a plan with the way things panned out, on site. So. And then I kind of blame it on the infection that I picked up, but on the drive home, because it took me I think it took us a good 7 or 8 days to get home back to where I live.
Yeah.
From there, overland, we drove. And I'd cut myself stupidly digging one of the latrines for the place with one of those beautiful traditional hoe type tools that old guy brought. Oh man, those things are beautiful. But so the thing pinged off a tire and it cut me in the ankle ever so slightly, like an inch wide and like but it got to the bone because it was on my ankle. And I ended up in hospital like just after getting home because I got pretty much blood poisoning, despite having had washed the wound out, having taken oral antibiotics for like a week. The infection somehow dodged the antibiotics and came back. But I kind of blame the slightly gung-ho mental processes that were going on to some extent on that, but I'm glad it happened. And I just looked at it and I said, I've been wanting to get into this. I've been wanting to do this stuff. I've spent all this time and money and energy on learning about it. And I kind of had a job at the time. Well, I did have a job as a water treatment technician doing industrial water treatment stuff. And I was not enjoying the environment in terms of working in factories, coal-fired boilers, massive cooling towers, real industrial stuff. And I just said, screw it. I'm going to go and build with this stuff. And luckily for me, a friend of mine was building, knew that I'd been to the States, knew that I was interested in this stuff, had a piece of land, and wanted to build. So I came back and I just said, cool, let's crack on. Let's do this. So I started with that, and that was a completely, I said to him, I won't charge you any kind of profit on this. I will purely charge you cost, which, 4 years later, I rue that slightly. But on the other hand, it was a double-edged sword. It allowed us to do what we've done. It allowed us to learn what we've learned. And it's provided its own set of challenges, but in the long run, but at the same time, it's completely allowed me to do what I've done. So I think it was still the right decision. But so we kicked off, and I just said to him, look, I don't know how this is going to go. This is the first time I've done this, as you know, and we'll learn together. And we have. And then it was I think we were about 2 years into that, because I was doing other stuff and his cash flow was limited. And so we were kind of building, sometimes with 2 people on site, sometimes with 10 people on site. As I say, we were kind of doing other things at the same time to stay afloat financially. And then the guys from Los Técnicos, Long Way Home in Guatemala, got hold of me. They found me. I think just through the network. I think through someone who wanted, a South African woman who wanted to come on the Malawi build, but had also been given an opportunity to go to the States, to go to New Mexico. And she got hold of me in the run-up to Malawi and said, what should she do? Because she had seen, I don't know how this happened, but somehow she had access to my Facebook page somehow, I don't know. But she had kind of seen that I had been to the States and that I was going on the Malawi build, and she wanted to know my thoughts. And I had said to her, go to the States, and she subsequently had met her now husband there. But anyway, she linked me in to the Guatemala guys when they were looking for a lead builder for the project in Cape Town, which they had been roped into via the Natural Building Collective based in Cape. So that, I think, is the building that you are referring to in terms of a big steel frame structures with loads of tires. So that kicked off in 2016.
And so that what is that building? It was for...
So that's 3 different buildings, actually. It's an entire campus for an early childhood development center, which was built in Delft Township in what's known as the Cape Flats, outside, or it's part of Cape Town, but technically outside of the city of Cape Town, outside the city ball. So basically what it is the city of Cape Town, as the municipality, that's what they're called, City of Cape Town, have prioritized early childhood development, education and care as one of the absolute pillars and cornerstones of social development and regeneration for the region. And there's this amazing architect who works for them called Ashley Hemraj, who realized that there was a massive opportunity to link that agenda for this early childhood development, which is essentially from birth to age 7. So these facilities have got space and infrastructure for babies, like who need nappy changes and stuff. They've got infrastructure for toddlers, and then they've got infrastructure for preschoolers, all designed to really give children in that whole age range proper care, proper nurturing, proper education, a safe, loving, caring environment to kind of thrive in, and to help mothers and people from the community to facilitate that whole process. So he realized that there was an opportunity to link that agenda to provide these spaces for children in society with the agenda for recycled and natural building and sustainable building, because in the South African legislation, it seems that they've made it much easier to build or to provide infrastructure for education. As I understand it, it's because they want people to be able to set up schools under trees if they have to, as long as they're teaching people. So essentially they were allowed to bring in sort of unusual building techniques, which were not in the codes, in the building codes at this stage. They were allowed to play with them a little bit in this space. So what they did was, he had already designed the steel frame structure, the kind of conventional structure, and he then found this guy, Peter McIntosh, from the Natural Building Collective, and brought him in as an advisor, sort of just to give him some ideas on how they could work these materials in. And Peter, through a process with Ashley, basically they came to the realization that, well, it's all very well and good to tweak the building and tweak the design and all this, but then who's going to build those elements? And they then brought Peter in to kind of advise on who actually had the capacity and the knowledge and the technical skills to be able to build something like this on that scale, which is where Long Way Home got involved. And Matt Penites came across from Guatemala to come and help us run it. And they then linked me in as one of the only people that they could find in our region who was building with these materials already. And so that's how I got pulled in there. And those buildings are, as I say, steel frame with a lot of glass built in, angled correctly to the sun so that they're very nicely passively heated in winter, but cool in summer. And then we did the east and west end walls in earth ram tires, with benches on the inside, natural plasters on the inside, all sorts of really fun embellishments with the cob and lime renders, creative stuff for the kids, using, incorporating bottles and things. We did a bunch of experimental different treatments in terms of the dividing walls inside the building. The architect wanted us to play with and demonstrate as many options for combining natural materials and recycled waste materials like eco bricks and bottle bricks as possible. So we did a whole bunch of those.
So what's exciting you at the moment in terms of natural materials? I mean, have you had any breakthroughs? Have you been experimenting with something that's particularly African or,
I think what's exciting me the most is the revival or the resurgence in interest in what are essentially Africa created. In my mind, Africa invented this stuff, man. When I talk to people here about these things, they ask me what I do, and I say, well, I'm building with the traditional materials, and I'm building with waste materials, which has become in the last, say, I don't know, I guess 50 years in our region is also quite a common thing, man. There's a lot of people who live in homes that are made out of what people would consider trash in other countries. Not because they think it's cool, but because that's all they have. And so what I'm enjoying, I don't think we've not come across anything that's crazy new and never done before. But I think what we're doing is we're combining materials in ways that people here certainly are not used to seeing. We're trying to bring an understanding and a technical use of materials in design to improve the functioning of buildings, so that they're not just made out of trash, but they actually perform better than a conventional home, using thermal mass and solar angles and all of that. And what's really exciting me is seeing these materials, which have kind of got a bad name to some extent because they've been either they're the traditional materials that people used and they're kind of often associated with poverty or, kind of not being hip and cool, because it's what, your granny lived in back in the village and it's made of mud. And we're taking these materials, which are also have got a lot of negative connotations in terms of living in shacks and all of that. And we're trying to flip it and say, no, actually, this is a global trend. And there are actually people who are moving out of apartments in New York and choosing to live in homes which are built out of earth and recycled materials. And so that's exciting me in terms of changing perceptions and making people realize that, hey, we're actually right at the tip of the spear in terms of this global movement, or we can be. And I'm really excited about things like the city of Cape Town pricking up its ears and throwing its shoulder behind the wheel and getting involved in a big way, because I don't see that really happening anywhere else in the world where proper government bodies are really taking notice and seeing the potential for this. And finally, and I think this is the most important, and it's one of the things that really excited me or really got to me when we were working in Malawi, was this is where these technologies need to be implemented. This is where these things need to come together. We've got massive urbanization trend here in Africa. We've got millions of people streaming out of, I guess, the hinterland to these burgeoning urban centers. And the demand for housing, the demand for shelter, the demand for resources, energy, water, food is exploding in those centers. And yet the grids cannot keep up. Our power systems fail. Our water systems are failing. Food is probably soon to follow. All of these things are difficult to get hold of. And we have this mass of trash that is beginning to choke our cities. And so we get these slums, we get this whole mess of problems that all are linked to each other, and yet they're also creating potentially or providing the fuel for the solution. And my hope is that we can make those connections and turn it from this massive problem to, wow, we can create far better housing and shelter solutions using our waste and the earth to create off-grid communities within the urban and peri-urban setting. So we're not adding those people to the grid. We're saving them the cost of ending up on the grid and all the hassles of being on a grid that's not keeping up. And we're, at the same time, we're not putting extra pressure on the grid.
I was thinking the other day whether humanitarian was a very good word. I mean, I think there's a lot of bad words around, like even developed is a crazy word. Yes. It should often be misdeveloped or, and all these terms go a bit on their head. But there's an element of, well, if you can do it here, that kind of, if you can do it here, you can do it anywhere sort of thing, which I really like about working in what Earthship often called majority world, which I think is one of the better terms.
It's a very good term, yeah.
And there's something really exciting about people who say, that's why I've enjoyed working abroad as well, whether it was Burkina Faso or Nepal or Malawi, these places where people welcome you rather than meeting this brick bureaucratic wall head on.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
sort of, finding yourself sort of peeling down this wall. That's something that could be, really excites me to hear you speaking about Cape Town putting its shoulder behind the wheel, and Africa just sort of coming back on the map for aspects and other, for aspects like community, and which I think are not spoken about enough. I mean, there's so many examples, and you'll know better than me, but of Africa's community or sense of community and use of technology, even simple things like the first Nokia phones and how they managed to monitor elections with these phones by texting a simple website. And there's all these examples of social sort of innovation in Africa, and it just sounds like there must be a real scene out there. I mean, do you feel that? Is that something you could speak about?
To an extent, it's difficult. I mean, I'm very much physically on the periphery I feel so in terms of, Cape Town's a long way from where I am, and certainly Cape Town is a very special node in terms of our region. It's a very different place, but I think these things are beginning to pick up. It's the connections between people. It's the connections between organizations that are all trying to do this, that are slowly forming. There's a lot of us, I think, that have been pushing away quietly, doing our thing individually. And I certainly am only now in the last couple of years becoming aware of the network that's out there and the potential kind of critical mass that's building. But it's still very much, it feels like it's in the early stages. I get very excited. These things go in ebbs and flows. It seemed like it was all, in 2016 when I got pulled into the project in Cape Town, it was like, oh my gosh, this is taking off. And it did to a large extent. There were, there's a thing called the EcoBrick Exchange, which is an interesting and a very exciting NGO that started up in South Africa, centered around the whole EcoBrick concept and how to get that flowing and to get those resources going. And there are a lot of people that in their individual capacities are changing their entire lives and dedicating their lives to this stuff. And what's going to change it, I think, is these bigger projects that shine light on it. I think things like your work that you're doing, to really bring it into the public eye, to bring it into consciousness. And I think we're on the cusp. I see more and more of this stuff popping up all the time. I'm seeing more and more lights coming on in people's heads when they see what we're doing. More and more people go, oh, you're doing that. I've seen that before. And it's immediately accepted to them.
It is hard to know if you're in an echo chamber sometimes, isn't it? But it does feel like the echoes are getting out of the chamber at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, look, I don't spend enough time as you will know, trying to get hold of me and trying to communicate with me. I'm very, very erratic and very, very seldom on social networks and things. And what I can tell you is I'm running around in a world where that's happening. People are certainly on social networks in Africa. It's big time here. But those echo chambers are very diverse for instance, the echo chambers that I've tapped into meeting Americans and Europeans and Australians through the American experience and the Malawi experience, where I was exposed to an international community that I don't have access to in my daily life. Right. And so it's interesting for me because I can kind of see what's going on in those echo chambers, so to speak. And I can kind of see what's going on in Botswana echo chambers and Cape Townian echo chambers, And just to speak to the echo concept, I got very down for quite a while about things like, hey, should I blog? People kept on saying, you should do a blog. And I've never done it. But my feeling was, well, what am I going to say that's new? What am I going to say that 100 other people aren't saying? And am I not just going to be this dumb echo sounding thing. And somewhere along the line, it flipped in my mind, and I realized, you know what? If ideas are not echoed, if something that resonates with you, you do not evoke back into the world by talking about it, by doing it, by creating, by resonating in some way, that idea eventually peters out and dies. And there's a reason why we have to keep on talking about Plato and, all of these great ideas and things in the world, because if books die, even if it's written down, one book, even if it said it perfectly, isn't enough. You need the people who read that book to echo what was said in that book in their own words, so that it keeps on being refreshed into the new language that is being spoken today. Because otherwise, the way people spoke when that idea was created, it dies, the vernacular dies. And so the narrative or the voice, that story, dies with it. And so there's something to the echoing. It is important.
I love what you're saying. I mean, it's this idea of resonance that
Yeah.
you need a certain amount of escape velocity for that each echo, and that one, can switch into a feedback loop maybe that grows, and that's what does feel like it's happening. And as you said, it is ebbs and flows. But for instance, the point that I feel I'm at personally with a lot of this stuff, and it's quite exciting to speak live to you now in some senses, but this is, sort of between you and me as well. I get excited about the cross-cutting projects, so the ones that are helping women, helping the environment, have an education aspect, maybe feed over into health. They're highly visible, they're inspirational. They could get funding, they could have a sort of even a commercial or a sustainable or even regenerative effect on food, etc., etc. And just trying to pick one of those projects at the moment. There's one in India that's a possibility at the moment.
Yes.
They're a big school that I'm in close contact with, tried to buy land. One place fell through, we're waiting for another place. And Offgrid Vision is aiming to find a project that lights people up and that bridges this gap, this funding gap, and just gets the snowball, rolling quicker than it melts, or echoing quicker than it fades. And I feel like a lot of the stuff that as you said, there are all these realities, and it seems to me, and this really makes me hopeful, is that the people involved, or at least the people I've met, have got their ego hopefully in check enough to be able to collaborate a bit more than traditionally happens with many newer initiatives. And, there isn't this sense of holding on to ideas. It is very much sort of passing on the knowledge. And if I have my own Earthship, for instance, who cares? But if, 2,000 people have it, then that's the whole point.
Right on. That's exactly it. I think, and I love again, another metaphor that I have in my head is of rafts, of little floating, platforms. And often when you're in this process of starting off on your own and trying to do something that nobody else in your area is doing, and you feel like you're on some little, you're clinging to a barrel, essentially. And as you go along, you pick up bits of flotsam and jetsam, and you start trying to build a little raft. And then at some point, you need other people to help you doing what you're doing. But in order to do that, your raft needs to get bigger. And there's this very scary, very tenuous process by which you accumulate things to attach to your raft and bind them on, but you need people. And you have to invite people onto your raft before your raft is really technically, seaworthy for two people. And there's that moment where you've got to have some what's the word, courage to invite somebody onto your raft that probably can't support you both. And and you've got to be honest in that interaction. You've got to be like, dude or chick, this is my raft. You can see what it is. There's nothing, what you see is what you get. I need you to be on this raft if I'm going to, go any further. Can you afford the risk? Can you take the risk? Can you accept the risk of doing that? Because I'm willing to take the risk of inviting you onto my raft. And that process grows, as the raft grows, and as you get more and more people involved in these things, and people are then, I imagine, these little individual rafts then start pulling together and tethering together, and you start getting these platforms, which again, like sometimes you need a whole bunch of people over on one side of the platform to work. And it's, I think within that whole process, I think what I'm getting to is, because so many of the people involved in this are coming grassroots, they're coming from the bottom up, and they've taken a lot of personal risk to be where they are. They have learned to be very humble. They've learned to be very honest about what they can and can't do, what they can and can't afford. They are very willing to put themselves at risk to get something done, because they see the project as far more important than themselves and their own agenda. Yeah. Because I think people are responding to a deeply felt need and a deeply perceived, and I think rightly perceived, imbalance in the way things are done. And it's the only way I can describe and explain the behavior that I've seen, the otherwise inexplicable behavior of people doing these projects and putting themselves out on a limb and, foregoing other much more easy opportunities in their own lives. I'm seeing people with amazing degrees and amazing talents and amazing opportunities to go into very conventional lifestyles, and they are choosing to take this slightly riskier, or much riskier path at this stage. And in that, we all realize, I think, that we've got to work together. We've got to shelve our own personal agendas quite often in order to push the bigger picture in different ways when we get an opportunity to.
Do any projects come to mind that have this cross-cutting nature that need... the reason I ask is because we're at a point now where I want to have a fixed project in mind and just start raising awareness and money for it. And sure. I want the right project. I'm hunting high and low. It's got to feel right, obviously. And someone like yourself is probably going to have more of a sense of what right feels like. But it's this cross-cutting education, health, often with women, I think, in a lot of countries, or maybe most countries, if not all countries, women can be so much more long-term, in their vision. What's the landscape like as you see it?
There are a couple of very interesting, very exciting projects that I've seen, that I've personally been involved with, or am in contact with. A couple come to mind. I would say probably the most wholly formed, the most well on its way, the most coherently conceived of, only because it's been not only but mainly because it's been thrashed out for like 10 years of hard grind and constant grueling, and really they've looked at themselves over and over again and made sure they're doing the right thing, is the guys in Guatemala, Long Way Home. Right. I've got to say, I've spent a lot of time with Matt, who's one of the founders, and man, they started off with education. They started off looking at education, but also the natural building stuff, the recycled building stuff. Matt explained to me, he said they sat down and they were like, well, we could build improved stoves to stop people from burning open fires in their homes and smoking themselves out, which, according to the data that they've collected, or the World Health Organization has collected, people are dying from respiratory diseases because they're cooking food in their homes on open fires. So that's number one priority in Guatemala, according to health stuff. So we could go out and we could build these stoves until we die, and we're never going to make an impact. And they looked at it, and what they really want to do is build. But they said, well, if we actually want to change anything, we've got to have some kind of educational impact. And so they literally went out and started a school. And in the process of that, as you do, you're like, whoa, we're going to build a school. And then it's like, okay, but then what does that entail? And, 10, 15 years later, these guys have built an entire campus from like preschool all the way through to the end of high school. they have built it entirely out of recycled and natural materials. They've built with like every single building technique that they could find and have tested them out for their local environment. They have written, I mean, Matt went and got a master's degree in education so that he could basically spearhead the creation of an entire curriculum that is specific to their school that ties in with the national curriculum. So they're not like, making kids so that they can't fit into society, but they have literally gone and said, what are the problems in the world, and specifically in our milieu, in our society here in Guatemala? What does the data say? Not what are people saying? What do the politics say? What does the economics say? They're saying, what does the data tell us is wrong with our society? Starting with health, starting with education, starting with environmental issues. And that's what they've built their entire curriculum around. And so they're rolling out that new curriculum the last couple of years. The kids are learning things like, they still do mathematics and all of that stuff. They still have to pass the national exams, but they are taught through this very, very interesting lens of find out what the data is, collect your own data. It's all Dewey based, which I'm not a pedagogue, but it's very much like take nobody's word for it, go and find out for yourself, and then work out your own solutions. And so it's really exciting what they're doing, because they're in a rural part of Guatemala. Guatemala has had a very rough history, socio-politically, economically, environmentally. They've got, it sounds a lot like a lot of Africa from what I've heard and what I've checked it out. I haven't been there yet. There's a lot of things. There's been civil war. There's a lot of substance abuse in society. There's a lot of poverty. There's a lot of environmental degradation. There's a lot of pollution. And yet these guys have taken the bull by the horns and are bringing all of those problems together and have found a way, as I say, over 15 years of really wide-eyed, open, non-apologetic decision-making and selflessness, I would say, in a lot of regard. They've brought together an incredible team of people. They've made an incredible connection with local people and an international community, which I think is often one of the biggest challenges, is getting, a lot of the projects that I see, unfortunately, kind of pan out to be a lot of people from the first world, even though we're not supposed to use those terms anymore, seeing what the problems are elsewhere and wanting to go and fix them over there, and coming in with very well meaning, but unfortunately it's often taken wrong, or it doesn't resonate on the ground, because it's like, hey, this is what your problems are, we can see it from over here. And the people on the ground are going, no, that's not my problem. My problem is this over here. Whereas these guys at Long Way Home seem to have managed to find that balance of, hey, what are your problems? And people are saying, these are my problems. And then they've created that dialogue over this extended period of time. And they've now got a consensus over what are the problems. Okay, how are we going to solve them? And they seem to be pushing forward with that. I think they really represent a really exciting opportunity there for me, because they've got the school. They've now got kids who are have been in the school for about 10 years. So they're starting to, actually produce human beings who have been brought up with this education, like hero school education, where they're seeing the world differently. They've been taught in an entire environment that was built out of these materials where it was just normal. And now they're rolling out adult learning programs. They're starting to take, or they have been for a long time, they're taking all of this stuff out into the other villages, addressing things like water provision, basic services, and taking villages kind of off the grid in terms of they're making them self-reliant and teaching them community stuff, not teaching them community stuff, reawakening themselves, these communities to the power that they already hold. So, for instance, they sent like one or two of their Guatemalan builders out to a village to build water cisterns to supply water to a village. And they get funding and stuff, and they get involved with Engineers Without Borders, but they do not go and say, listen, we're going to pay for all of this and we're going to give you this thing. What they do is they rock up and they say, listen, somebody came to us to ask us to help you. We've worked with you for like 2 years to work out what is your primary problem. We've identified that water is your main issue. Here's the design for the water tank. This is what it's going to cost. This is what it's going to take in terms of labor and involvement. We're putting 2 people here who we are paying to do this. We're going to fund these materials. You as the community needs to put in this much money, and each of you needs to put in this many hours. Are you willing to do it? And they've done this more than once. These communities have looked at it and gone, yeah, let's do this. And by sending 1 or 2 guys who have the technical skills to a village, they've had that entire village build these water cisterns properly with literally the resources that they already had.
Wow.
Now that, to me, is where it's at.
Yeah, that's the scalability thing where it's so exciting to think. I mean, the microloans and stuff made me think about this kind of thing, and just the ownership aspect of doing something and really valuing it. And that classic example of the puppy you get given or you pay for, and how you treat the puppy throughout its life.
Yeah.
No, that sounds super exciting. I'm gonna have to really look up. I've the names always kept coming around, and I've never really got into it further. But it sounds like they've gone down a bit further down the road in terms of the infrastructure, the community side, the communication side, the organization side, and that's where there's so much to learn. And you find yourself.
They've been at it for a long time, Patrick, and they've got so many. It's so nuanced, and so it's difficult to pin down what they do because they've been involved with so much for so long in that environment, and they haven't. I didn't know much about them until they got hold of me. And then I've seen what they've done, and it's like, wait, when did you do that? And then, I've not got access to a whole bunch of information now on everything they've done. It's like, wow, when did you guys sleep? But the key to it is, as I say to you, is the Guatemalans have taken it on. It's not just something that came from Mars and kind of like happened. It's really had uptake from the ground. So, and then similar but same but different in South Africa. Something that really excites me here is obviously the stuff I'm involved in, but it's also that's boring because I'm involved in it. But the Natural Building Collective and what's happening in Cape Town is very exciting. There's a thing called the Mayoral Urban Regeneration Program, which is another initiative of the city of Cape Town, where they have basically taken, again, a whole decades of research into socioeconomic, sociopolitical issues going on in the Cape Flats area of Cape Town, which is historically segregated zoning. Apartheid era segregated areas where only people of certain skin colors could live in certain areas of the city area, and the impact that had socially was intentionally created by physical infrastructure. They specifically, the government at the time specifically denied routes of access into other areas from the disadvantaged areas. So there were no trains, there were no roads. It was very difficult to get from point A to point B. The schools, there were fewer schools. The schools were built badly, or more like prisons than like schools. There were no public spaces because they didn't want people gathering and having public gatherings. So there is still this legacy, no matter what else has moved on. There are still these massive legacies that exist within just the physical environment.
Wow, just systemic blocking.
And it's not by mistake. A lot of other places in the world, it was by mistake.
If you applied half of that of that effort and mental sort of juice to solving the problems, you could
So what they've done now is they've done all this research over decades to work out exactly where are what are really the cruxes of this thing. They've set up this thing, and they're targeting an area called Hanover Park, which is, for lack of a better word, a suburb, but it's huge. And it was historically where people, I don't know if you've heard of a place called District 6, but it's very well known in South Africa. Basically, it was what is known in apartheid language as a colored area, so people of mixed ethnic origin. There was kind of this place that had grown organically in Cape Town, on the edge of the city, which is the city bowl. You could see Table Mountain, in the heart of the place. And I think it was in the 60s. That place was forcibly, all the people were forcibly removed. The place was bulldozed, and these people were then relocated to a place in what's known as the Cape Flats, which is like around the back of the mountain, on this like flatlands, which is kind of like dune wetlands geographically, and they were just dumped there. And so Hanover Park is this massive slap in the face to begin with. It was called Hanover Park after the main road of District 6, which was Hanover Street. So it was, again, a slap in the face even in its naming. And then the problem started. And now it is like gang capital of the world, gang murders or murder capital of the world, drug capital, huge social and economic issues in that community. And what the city of Cape Town has done is turned around and said, right, we're starting here, and we are dismantling all of the infrastructure that is perpetuating this, and we are reinventing it. So they've done this amazing redesign based on very good research of the infrastructure, but also social programs, schools, hospitals, police stations, training. So it's right across the board, from physical infrastructure through to what my sister, who works in organizational stuff. They used to call it the soft stuff. They now call it the harder stuff, which I think is very, very real. Really trying to do the really difficult work of changing mindsets and delving into that stuff. But that's really exciting.
This sort of leads me on or makes me think of a documentary I watched recently called Demain, so tomorrow in French.
Mm-hmm.
It translates in various... I don't know if you've seen it at all.
I haven't, no.
It follows through various parts of the world. This group of filmmakers went around a lot of places in Europe as well, looking at local currencies, looking at places in the UK, for instance, where they have communal gardening, they have sort of vegetable gardens outside the police station, and they look at local currencies that are creating 4 times each unit's value as they get spent, rather than just 1.5 times each unit value with fiat currencies. And just finding solutions left, right and centre of communities that, once they're given the chance, bond together and learn from each other, teach each other, and become part of something bigger than each individual member. And it's just such an easy recipe in some ways, just in the same way that, water falls from the sky, and plants grow out of dirt, and, it's just like it shouldn't be that difficult, but it's been, it has been a bit of, it's almost like we're waking up now to how, this dream is a bit silly, and there's far more intelligent ways to do stuff. And so it's not just in, Africa and going to Africa or Guatemala. It's absolutely everywhere that the same story is taking place. And I just want to be a part of it and learn to do my bit. And, it brings together the economic part of things with local currencies and these ideas, and permaculture stuff
Yes.
with the growing
Yeah.
and the part of the ecosystem, and then the social stuff and the environmental stuff, and it really is eventually going to get to a point where the investment starts to pay back, isn't it?
I think so.
It just seems like it's taking a while for that payback.
It is. It's tricky because we're still very much in a world that's dominated by essentially corporate interests, I think. And not just from the corporate side. There's a lot of interest in becoming corporate. Because that's another thing that should not be overlooked, certainly in Africa, or in my Africa, the Africa that I interact with, is that there is still the conventional, for lack of a better term, narrative, the corporate narrative, the narrative of more is more, of the faster, shinier, splashier car, and the more air conditioning you have on your house, the better you are. That's still a very strong narrative in the society, and there's a lot of aspiration towards that. Bling culture, the hip hop bling culture, the aspirational. I want to crawl above, climb above the pit of poverty with my 9mm and my flashy rims on my vehicle. That's still a very powerful pull for a lot of people, and I don't think that should be underestimated. However, within that, there are people who are already getting sick of that. There are already people, or there already are. There always have been people who see through that or see past that to a different vision. And my experience, another two kind of examples of, you said what exciting things and exciting initiatives. There's a group called Start Living Green who are based in Bloemfontein, and what they've done is they've just thrown the rule book out, and they've just said, okay, there's a whole bunch of people living in shacks and less than shacks in our community who have nothing and have been severed from their culture systematically, so they don't even know how to build a mud hut anymore, because even though their grandparents did, they were systematically uprooted and cut away from their culture and urbanized so brutally that, and parents killed and whatever, that these people no longer even have access to those materials and those knowledge systems. And they've just gone out there and challenged the authorities to give them a space to be creative and innovative in. And kudos to them, to both the guys at Start Living Green and at the municipalities and stuff who did this. They said, okay, because the argument was, well, look how bad it is. Look how much trouble you're having addressing this problem. What can trying something different hurt? What can we break in throwing out the rule book and just doing whatever we can? And so that's really exciting, because what they've done is they have gone out of their way to say, we will not accept or we will not have money as any part of any of these projects. So they've gone out, and none of the people who do their work basically get paid or pay for any of the stuff they do. So they're putting the technology, the materials, and the techniques directly into people's hands and saying, you want to do something? Try this, see how that works for you. And what that does is it takes it from a thing of, oh, I'm going to do this because I'm getting paid, and I don't care if it works or not, and takes it very quickly into the realm of, if this has value, if the value is self-evident, then I will pursue it. And that's really exciting to me. It's terrifying to me, because it's taking materials and things where, it could be dangerous, because I have that kind of mind where I'm always looking for risk. And certainly, accidents do happen. But at the level and at the kind of the risk that they're taking is, well, you have a house where the roof leaks or where the wall's a bit wonky, or you don't have a house at all, And so, and it's not people from outside doing these things for these people going, well, this is Africa, who cares? It's those people themselves doing it and taking those risks for themselves. but with a little bit of help in terms of know-how and guidance. And it's really exciting because you've got like 12-year-old kids going out there and building homes, improved homes for elderly people in their communities with nothing but like a rickety wheelbarrow and a broken spade, and that's what they bring. And it's like, hey, can you help us? We want to learn how to do this. And they're putting that into people's hands and they're testing it out, and it's real groundswell. That's real to me. So that's very exciting.
We've mentioned a whole bunch of organizations, which I'll definitely put in show notes.
Sure.
But have you got any requests of anyone that could be out there for stuff you're doing now that could be useful for them, useful for you?
Geez, I don't know. I mean, obviously, I haven't said much about what we've actually been doing in Botswana in terms of we've been working with some cool people on some really nice initiatives in terms of building community. We've done a community park, which is based around sport, with a group called Pula Sports Development Association. That's really exciting for me because it feeds into everything that we've been talking about. What I've really been enjoying with my work is trying to pull in the agenda of the landscape around the building. So, a lot of the people who are in the natural building stuff and whatever, they're into this. They're aware of the world outside the building, but it's very difficult to be a builder and a landscaper, But what I've been doing as much as I can is essentially saying, well, look, you want me to build something, I will do that if you allow me to do the landscaping around it. That's just fun and interesting. I think it's an integral part of the whole thing is where it doesn't snow and where you can actually grow outdoors all year round. It's a no-brainer, and it encapsulates all the ethos of why you would be building a building like that, and extends it into the landscape and takes hopefully conservation principles from your home outward. As I said to you at the beginning of this journey, for me, I left university, I was in biological science, and I was going and working in a game reserve trying to see if wildlife research or whatever was going to be my thing. And I very quickly realized we know pretty much everything we need to know about these animals, and what we need to know, we learned that a long time ago, and what it is they need more space, where they need more habitat, where we're not like destroying their homes. And by fencing them off and then focusing on them inside fences, we're missing the point, because what that means is we perpetuate this conservation concept that it's okay, we can do whatever we want in our garden because we're conserving wildlife and nature over there behind the fence. So that's why I came back to the city and started doing what I'm doing in whatever way I could, was because I was desperate to find a way to firstly in my own life and in my own habitat, to be able to start conserving from my bed outward rather than from the Okavango to me. And I was desperate to find ways to do that and to solve my resource issues without destroying stuff, and hopefully regenerate stuff in the process. And
I think the regeneration is a word you've used a number of times, and I think it should be the new sustainable. Sustainable means so little.
Oh man,
it's so much better.
Have you heard of this thing called Theory U, coming from MIT?
No.
Oh my God,
no.
Theory U and MIT.
What's that?
It is. Again, my sister is a very important person to talk to in terms of this stuff. But if you could get hold of Otto Scharmer from MIT and talk to him about this stuff, man, just look up Theory U, as in theory with the letter U, and the name Otto Scharmer. I can't. I mean, it's going to be another 4 hours if I start getting into it. And I'll flick you a couple of very interesting documents that are kind of like the key. In my understanding of it, the key kind of texts, which kind of outline where this whole thing comes from. But it is like the unified theory of change, basically. It's like the unified theory of global and personal and organizational patterning, including the economy and its relation to the environment and its impact on society and environment. So it synthesizes like everything from sociology, psychology, environmental ecology, economics, all all of these things. And
wow, I'm looking at the site now.
man,
It looks
and it not only
fantastic.
gives
It's
you,
ottosharma.com.
and it not only gives you a very, very, very good set of metaphors for explaining and understanding the status quo, it gives you a very, very good understanding of how and why we've got to the point we are at. And it gives you a very practical, very tangible set of tools as an individual and as communities for how to start implementing change and creating new things. It is the most, I think, of all the stuff we've talked about, that is the most coherent treatment. And these guys are on it, man. And if the more people that can get some kind of training with them and start implementing the worldview that they are espousing, I think we stand a chance.
Man, this is super exciting.
Because, so many of us are trying to grapple with like, oh, what's going on? What's going on? How do I describe this? How do I come to terms with what this is? And these guys have just got a way of doing that. They run amazing MOOCs, so those massive online courses, which are just profound. And I feel like, things like what I'm involved in, these building courses and these projects, if we could get them organized through these tools, through this Theory U concept, and we could bring groups together. My sister is doing it in the UK at the moment, actually, for Arab, which is a big global consulting engineering firm. And they're like using some of this stuff. I mean, it's been used in Zambia for the Ministry of Health. It's things like taking executives out of their offices, getting them barefoot and walking them barefoot through a park and getting them to go on sensing journeys and stuff. So it's like corporate boardroom meets hippie, but without freaking out the hippies and without freaking out the boardroom. Or freaking them all out just enough to make them switch gears, but not freaking them out enough to shut down. Because that's the key.
Well, everyone's been a child before. Do you know what I mean?
This is it.
So it shouldn't be that difficult.
But it's very difficult. I mean, you talking to her about, especially in the UK, but getting people, peeling away the layers of identities that people have learned to protect themselves in. They've got layers and layers and layers of shells that they put on every morning, or they don't even know that they're there. But to get to the person inside all the layers of onion skin can be very difficult. But the results you get when you crack that final egg, and the thing is, you can't smash the egg because that's why the shells are there. So if you try and break people open, more often than not, they just clam up, even, and their barriers are much stronger than your sledgehammer. Whereas if you can somehow winkle them out and kind of intrigue them and get them to feel safe enough to come out of their own shell, you get completely different results. And man,
wow! I mean, that's where, like, that's the something I've been considering a lot recently is humor.
Yes.
How once someone is laughing, once the laughter is happening, once the belly is pulsating, too much energy from within it, reverberating that and resonating that with other people around, then connection happens. And if you think about it, a courtroom, for instance, or parliament buildings, the last thing they want people doing in there is laughing.
Correct. Very, very true.
And this sounds like it's a way of trying to just just bring out the human again.
Yes.
Just
100%. And they do all sorts of stuff. They play with all sorts of stuff. I actually I thought up, my sister I was brainstorming with her, and we were trying to work out how does she do that? How does she crack like a group of like 40, real tough engineers who have been in the game for, 30, 40, 50 years, some of them, and who are, they've been through everything and they're just there to get the job done. And I thought, what about some magic? Sleight of hand. Like you're saying, tap into that childlike wonder, some kind of that thing where everything all your layers can't defend you against a really good magician who can make things disappear and reappear. And even though it's impossible, you have to believe what's happening because you can't, I don't know if she ever managed to use it, but I think laughter and magic, I think, are the two things that can really, because what it's about is, and there's that guy Ramdas who talks about this, and I guess the yogis all do, but it's about making you realize that the level you're on right now, this level, the cerebral level of, Newtonian physics and stuff, like, is only just it's just one of the screens you could be watching. It's one of the channels that's on. And humor and magic both challenge you and make you realize, oh, there's other stuff happening right now. I'm just not tuned into it. And I think that's the key to all of this stuff is...
Yeah, until you are. That's the funny thing. You don't get the joke and then suddenly you're laughing.
Yeah,
it's just a weird transformation or conscious change that happens.
And then you look across and everybody else is laughing, and then and then it really gets exciting because then you start setting each other off. And that's where the echo chamber, that whole reverberation, resonance thing comes into play as well. Is once you get a room laughing, it's difficult to stop it.
No, totally, and it's ridiculous to stop it.
Yeah, why would you want to?
Oh man, listen, that's a beautiful note, I think, to wrap up this conversation, but we've got to have many more. I'm sure we will do. So all I can say is thank you.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Very cool to talk to you. You don't realize how, and when I say to you I live cut off, it's because I live in this place where there's not a lot of people doing what I do, not a lot of people thinking the way I think. I guess everybody feels this way to an extent, but I then don't use the internet enough, perhaps, to talk to people that I've met, like you. We were in the same place at the same time for 4 weeks. I think we actually talked probably for about 2 hours in total then, and it's like it takes this long before I actually talk to you again. And I'm like, why don't I talk to this dude once a month?
That's what this whole experience has been like. I mean, the conversations, the people that are out there, it's just unreal what people are doing. It's super inspiring.
Well, please keep doing what you're doing, man. And I'm going to start listening to you. Definitely, you're going to be I'm going to log in and try and download as much of your stuff today as possible while I'm on the connection.
It's just getting started off. There's others coming, and I'm starting to hear from people as well, and it's been really, really fun. So, some are going to be good, some are going to be up your alley, and others aren't, and that's just the way it is, and it's all good.
It's all up my alley. It's all up my alley, definitely.
Well, listen, you take care, and we'll be in touch.
Indeed. Thank you so much for chatting.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Before you go, or rather immediately after you've gone, please go down to iTunes, leave a review, help us grow, get more guests, raise more money for projects. We have other projects coming up. You can find news about those on offgrid.vision, where you can also get access to other shows and some phenomenal t-shirts which go towards, the profit of which goes towards new projects. If you have any requests for someone to come on the show, do let me know via the site. Until next time, thanks for listening, and see you soon.